Welcome to episode 282 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. My special guest in this episode is Caryn-Ann Allen. She's the Associate Director of Sustainability at DPD Group. We're going to talk about DPD Group's journey to net zero, the strategies it's employing to reduce emissions, customer expectations when it comes to sustainable delivery, and much more. We're going to detail about DPD Group's net zero strategy as well, with some real-life examples of what DPD Group is doing to achieve its net zero goal. Now, before we get to Caryn-Ann, a quick reminder that Parcel and Post Expo will be held in Frankfurt, 18th to 20th of October. Register online at parcelandpostexpo.com. It's going to be big. I'm going to be there. Look forward to meeting you there. Now, coming up in just a moment, Caryn-Ann Allen, Associate Director of Sustainability at DPD Group. Joining me on the line is Caryn-Ann Allen. She's the Associate Director of Sustainability at DPD Group. Caryn-Ann, welcome. We're going to get stuck into this idea of urban logistics and DPD Group's own commitment, or commitments, I suppose, around emissions reductions and things like that. DPD Group recently made an announcement about a commitment to net zero. What was the commitment, and why is it important?
Yes, so thanks, Ian. So as you mentioned, we announced in July of this year that we had submitted a 2040 net zero ambition to the SBTi, which is the Science-Based Target Initiative. And in essence, what this means is that we are aiming to reduce our emissions by 90% by 2040, and looking to then offset the residual 10% of those emissions by the same time. And that would essentially mean that we would reach net zero by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. However, obviously, 2040, it's a long time coming. You know, there's a good number of years between now and then. And so we've also set an interim target of minus 43% of emissions by 2030. And that's based on a 2020 baseline. And this is significant because not only are we setting a very clear target about where we want to go as a business in terms of decarbonisation, but we're also very serious about wanting to walk the talk and not just talk the talk. And this is really important in terms of us being able to build up trust with our different stakeholders. Because again, we haven't just made the commitment. That commitment has been made based on a very clear roadmap that we have put together to reach net zero by 2040.
So what does that mean then, or is it important even to shippers, so the e-commerce merchants, etc., and consumers, so those people who are shopping online and receiving parcels?
Absolutely. I think, we want to be ambitious on decarbonisation. And I think it's really about looking, within our business to identify how we can really transition our operations towards lower emission technologies and energies. And that doesn't just benefit us as a business in terms of also future-proofing our business for tomorrow, but it also means that our partners, be it our customers, shippers, final consumers, it's also a way of sending a very strong message that they're working with a partner that takes sustainability and decarbonisation seriously. And as I said, we're really looking to walk the talk and not just talk the talk.
And what about the science-based targets? So what does that mean, and why is that important?
So it's important because it really means that businesses like ours are setting emissions reductions that are aligned with climate science. And these objectives are approved by the organization SBTi, so the Science-Based Target Initiative, which is made up or was founded originally by organizations like the CDP, the World Wildlife Fund, the UN Global Compact. So it's really a recognition of the seriousness with which business is looking to reduce emissions.
How does DPD Group then get to net zero, given that it's got delivery fleets and all that sort of stuff? So what's the plan?
So really, we're focusing our efforts across 4 key areas of our business. So first and foremost, our pickup and delivery services, so our first and last mile operations, also across our line haul or trunking operations, buildings, and then finally also looking at company cars and any on-site freight that we're using. I think it's important also to just kind of take note of the fact that if you look at our overall carbon emissions, around 90% of those emissions come from transport-related operations, so pickup and delivery or line haul. So that's obviously where most of our focus will be is on decarbonising in those areas.
And what about electric vehicles then? What role do they play in all of this?
So I think, very clearly one of the main areas that we'll be looking at is to try and move away as much as possible from any ICE and diesel vehicles. And obviously, electric vehicles will play a very big part in that. Over the last couple of years, we've had a very strong focus on transitioning at least our first and last mile fleet away from diesel vans towards electric vehicles. And that has also been kind of spurred on by the decision we made around 2 years ago, which was to deliver 350 cities in Europe with fully low emission fleets. And that's really also allowed us to kind of ramp up the uptake of EVs across our business, particularly in Europe. And I think just last year, if you were to take 2021, for example, we more than doubled the size of our low emission fleet to over 5,000 vehicles in Europe. And we have BUs like DPD UK, for example, that just this year have ordered another 1,000 EVs to be delivered soon.
So we've talked about electric vehicles, and I'd say a lot of people would say that EVs are good. They've got the range, which is probably suitable for urban delivery. There's the issue of obviously the longer distances. And those distances can vary from country to country, can't they? The difference, the long haul in Belgium might be different from long haul in, France or Germany. Anyway, my question here really is what sort of strategies or trials can there be to try and reduce those emissions out of the long distance trucking?
You're absolutely right. I think, the question, we don't need to ask ourselves the question anymore about how we are going to decarbonize last mile. However, the big question that we're asking ourselves today is how are we going to decarbonize those long haul trips, what we call the line haul operations? Because today there is no magic bullet. We do know that electric truck technology is slowly coming to the market. However, it's not yet a viable solution for us. And one of the big challenges is obviously that these trucks are still prohibitively expensive for most businesses. They're also, the infrastructure is not there in terms of recharging, which makes them difficult to run from an operations perspective. And also in terms of the availability of the models that we would need. However, that being said, we are still looking to see what we can potentially trial within our business. And at the moment in Switzerland, we're running 2 electric trucks, and they travel now, they have a range of nearly 800 kilometers. And that's been fairly successful. And we've been able to demonstrate that obviously electric truck technology for long haul can be a solution. However, in terms of our roadmap, what we see is that it will certainly be a mix of energies for long haul operations and a mix of technologies. Obviously, electricity will play a big part of that, but we're also looking at certain transition alternatives like biogas, for example, but also longer term looking at hydrogen. But that's not for right now. It's for a much more longer term perspective.
And what about infrastructure? Have there been any infrastructure challenges that you've come across as part of this journey so far?
Absolutely. And I would go as far as to say that's almost one of the major issues that we have. So if you look at the first and last mile, infrastructure is improving, but it can still be improved more. We're doing a lot of investing in our own EV charging infrastructure on site, but clearly there is more work to do, I think, in terms of public recharging infrastructure. And that's just for vans. I think, again, when you talk about trucks, clearly there's still a lot of work to do there before we're able to really use low emission trucks on a large scale.
And let's focus in a little bit more on urban logistics, first mile and last mile, things like that. What are some of the specific challenges that DPD Group's come up against when it comes to moving towards net zero in urban logistics?
So I think, this is a really a good question, and I think if you consider cities across Europe or even globally, they're all faced with very similar challenges. congestion, pollution, noise. However, I think each city, each country is unique, and the way that they address those challenges can differ somewhat. And I think, again, when we look at how we can decarbonize in urban areas, one of the immediate solutions is obviously to look towards, electric vehicle solutions. And as I said, that's really one of our key focus areas, and one of the programs that we've been pushing very heavily within the business over the last couple of years. However, it's not only about EVs. There's also a number of other actions that a company like ours can take to improve the environmental impact of our service. So other types of initiatives could be, for example, looking at how we can reduce the distance that we travel between, our depots, our hubs, and the final consumer. And that's one of the things that we're doing now, is also trying to identify and build out a stronger network in urban areas. Today, I think we have a network of around 150 urban depots in Europe. And the challenge that we kind of face there is the fact that real estate isn't readily available. Often it's quite expensive. It might not be suited to our operations. So it's really about also working with authorities and other actors within the urban space to identify how we can maybe expand the offer in terms of urban real estate for transport and logistics players like ourselves. But it's also, I think, about kind of building out that network, because it also means that we're closer, as I said earlier, to the final consumer. So there's a positive impact on service quality. But it also means that we're in a better position to use low emission alternatives like EVs, as we mentioned, but also cargo bikes and walkers, for example.
There's not been a lot of talk about that, about if you're getting closer to the consumer, it opens up the range of delivery options available. I think it's a really important point. And I like what you've said about this earlier. You mentioned about how it's not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to urban delivery and finding low emissions alternatives for delivery. Are there any sort of examples that you can share of how there might be a difference from one market to another?
Yes, so that's really something that we've noticed, is that consumer preference, depending on the market, can differ quite significantly. So, for example, in a country like Estonia, or more broadly within the Baltic states, there's a marked preference for locker delivery. And again, I think that kind of is a reflection also of the local culture, where people are quite private. They don't really like others coming into their space. Whereas in a country like France, for example, shoppers they prefer home deliveries, and I think that's at about an 80% preference for home deliveries. So yeah, as a European player, we do see very marked differences across the continent in terms of consumer preferences for deliveries.
And that really does link nicely to what my next question is going to be, which is what do consumers consider to be sustainable delivery? I mean, does the answer to that vary depending upon where the consumer is even?
I think there is a lot of difference, depending on the consumer in terms of what they consider to be sustainable delivery. And again, there's not one alternative that kind of comes to the fore. In our latest eShopper barometer, we actually asked this question to try and get a better sense of, what consumers do consider to be more sustainable delivery options. Sort of at the top of the list was very much, a low emission vehicle. So an electric vehicle, for example, would be considered a low or a sustainable delivery to consumer. But others might consider the fact that they buy a number of things online and then decide to bundle the delivery into one single delivery as being more sustainable. But I think also within that study, what came to the fore was the fact that consumers, to a certain extent, are also willing to swap, go shop somewhere else online if they are looking for a more sustainable delivery option, and that is something for a certain group of consumers that is really important.
So then what about consumer behaviour? When they're selecting the delivery options, what have you observed there, or what opportunities are there to even influence consumer behaviour?
And I think this is really important, because I think sustainability is a topic that isn't just black and white. It's kind of often a very gray zone that we get into about what is more sustainable, what is a more sustainable delivery. And I think what's really interesting is to have a look at, the whole life cycle of a delivery, for example. And I know, obviously, we've seen a lot of communication about, pickup shops, out-of-home delivery options being more sustainable. And I think in certain situations, they may be more sustainable, at least from an operator's perspective. We're able to bundle deliveries to fewer stops, for example, which makes us more efficient. However, we can't lose sight of how the consumer then chooses to go and pick up his or her parcel. Because obviously, if the consumer then chooses to take their diesel or petrol car, well, then they kind of, wipe out any emission savings that would have been made by choosing the parcel shop delivery from the beginning. And I think really, there's a number of delivery options that are available: home delivery, out of home delivery. And I think what we need to also keep our eye on is the first time delivery rates. So to avoid having to re-deliver parcels to a home address. And that is one of the ways also that we're trying to at least raise awareness about this topic, at least with our consumers through the My DPD app, where we would maybe, if you're not home, maybe nudge you towards choosing the parcel shop option, which means then that obviously there's not that redelivery aspect to back to that same address the next day, for example.
You just made the really important point about consumers' post-delivery behaviour and sort of how that might impact the total emissions. I don't know if that's quite the right way to put it. But how can a delivery company like DPD raise awareness among consumers so that they can make informed decisions when it comes to selecting their delivery options? So whether it's getting it home delivered, getting it delivered to a parcel locker where they know they can do a bit of trip chaining or something like that. So what can be done?
So again, a good question, and we're looking at this from different angles. I think one angle that we're looking at is also in terms of how we are calculating and reporting on emissions for parcel delivery. So to be able to get very as specific or as accurate data as we can with regards to a delivery, where we're able then also to inform the consumer about how much CO2 is being generated by the delivery of their parcel. So that's one way. But at the same time, what are you going to do knowing that your delivery emitted X grams of CO2? That's, you need more than just a number. And again, it's about trying to use the communication tools that we also have. So, for example, the My DPD app, our email notifications, to raise that awareness. So, for example, to encourage consumers to perhaps, if they can, walk or use the public transport to go and collect their parcel. Otherwise, it could also be, raising awareness, for example, about, as I said earlier, the importance of first-time delivery. So, yeah, there's a number of ways that we can do that. And again, also taking into consideration the customer journey with us, and making sure that that information is available to the consumer at the right time and at the right place.
On this topic of finding urban real estate and urban depots, has this forced DPD Group to find some creative solutions?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's also about identifying what already exists in the urban environment that we can also use and build on. And so, for example, we are trialing, for example, a depot, an urban depot in Bologna in Italy, where we have sort of a mixed space, if I can put it that way, where we have a small storage section in the depot, which then allows us to deliver to local addresses using 2 cargo bikes. But we also have a parcel shop service where consumers can come in and pick up their parcel or return parcels. And we're also trialing some other services, for example, like having a dressing room where consumers can also come in and try on clothes that they might have bought online, keep them if they fit, or maybe return them immediately if they don't. We're also thinking of how can we use urban spaces differently. So, for example, in Paris, we have an example of where we're using a underground parking space, which is mostly empty during the day as people go to work, as a mobile hub and depot for parcel delivery. And that's something then obviously that we use during the day and then goes back to being a parking spaces at night. So it's again about thinking differently about the spaces that we are currently using or could potentially use.
Let's talk about this idea of ecosystem thinking. What does ecosystem thinking mean?
That's a really good question. And ecosystem thinking is really about being able to take into consideration and look at the total impact of, for example, the goods and services that we choose to buy. So, for example, the total impact of e-commerce doesn't just come down to the transport and the delivery of the parcels. We also need to consider, for example, the production, the manufacturing, phases of what we buy online, but also the end of life, for example. So what happens to that product once we've finished using it? So it's really thinking about the overall impact of a product that we might buy online, for example.
There's some people might say, though, that this is a delivery company stepping outside of what it actually does. Is this something that the delivery sector should tackle on its own, or is it something that has to be done in partnership with everybody else in the chain?
No, I think it definitely is something that we need to address as part of the chain and in collaboration with others. I think obviously where we can have a direct influence and an impact is within what we control. So obviously the delivery side of things. However, we spoke earlier, for example, about consumer behavior in how they go to collect their parcel, for example, from a pickup shop or from a parcel shop. We might be able to say, well, that's not our responsibility. However, I do believe we have a responsibility to better inform consumers about how they can go and pick up that parcel in a way that continues to keep emissions lower, for example. So by walking or taking public transport or biking, if that's possible for them.
Maintaining this broad focus, then, we're talking about not just the pipeline that takes the parcel from the warehouse to the customer's doorstep, or from the warehouse to the parcel locker, or whatever it might be, which is the network that the postal and delivery companies have all created. So are we taking a broader look at this and saying, well, hang on, if we've created this network, what else can we do? How else can we inform customers? Is that the sort of thing we're saying here?
Absolutely. I think we do need to have a broader focus. And, for example, we can speak about packaging too. We can't dictate to a shipper what type of packaging they can use, but we can obviously also try to raise awareness, or to at least facilitate, for example, this whole idea about circular economy and keeping goods and materials in within the system, as it were. And we have some great examples from within our business about how we're working to support circular economy. So, for example, in the UK, we have an initiative called Relove, where we work with a number of fashion retailers that when we deliver a parcel, we also offer a service where we're able to take back any used or clothing that the customer might want to get rid of, that we then donate to a charity of their choice. And another example is in France with Stuart, where they work with where they collect small electronic devices, and they take them back to the manufacturer, who then is able to refurbish and repurpose them and give those materials a second life. And so we're very much part of this system, and we also have our role to play.
So there is this network that's been built, as we were just saying, and whilst there's been a lot of focus on there is growing focus on decarbonising, or making it more environmentally friendly, reducing emissions, making better neighbourhoods, and all these sorts of things. Can we also talk about then creating what can we call it? A network that supports directly the circular economy, whether it's through recycling or reusing or second life or whatever you want to call it. Is that sort of an end game we can talk about? And if so, is decarbonisation or et cetera relevant to that as well?
Absolutely. I think today we tend to look at decarbonisation and circular economy as two often separate areas, but I do think they're very much linked. Obviously, if you're able to work on a circular economy, you're able to avoid having to remake or reproduce new materials and new products, and that all kind of plays towards decarbonisation. And I think it's really mutually supporting areas of focus. And while we might address them separately, I think they're still very much linked. And focusing on one will support and help to progress and advance progress on the other.
Caryn-Ann, we've covered so much in this conversation, and there's so much more we could talk about, not just about DPD Group's commitment to net zero. We've just sort of touched on this idea of circular economy. But if people want to find out more about what DPD Group is doing in all of these regards, where should they go?
Yes, well, I think the best place to go would be to visit our website, so be DPD.com. And we have a very rich sustainability section there that people can have a look at. Our latest sustainability report, but also more information, for example, on our net zero ambition and where we stand on our decarbonisation roadmaps.
So dpd.com, go there and follow the links. You'll be able to find more on what DPD Group is doing in regard to its commitment to net zero and much more. Caryn-Ann Allen, Associate Director of Sustainability at DPD Group, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thanks very much, Ian.
That's all for this episode of the Postal Hub podcast. Remember to subscribe to the podcast in your favourite podcast platform, like the one you're listening to right now. If you're not listening to this on the Postal Hub website, of course. But you can subscribe in Spotify, in Google Podcasts, in Apple Podcasts, and probably other places that I don't even know about. Subscribe. You get each episode downloaded automatically to the device of your choosing. While you're subscribing, please do leave a rating. 5 out of 5 would be great, just to, give you a little suggestion. And leave some comments on your favourite platform as well. Like, this is a great podcast, giving me all the insights I need into, the last mile postal industry, something like that. Just make it up. Make it sound authentic and believable. Anyway, where are we going with this? I don't know. Towards the end of the podcast, I think that's where we're going. Let me just say this. If you want to email me about anything at all, mostly if it's related to this podcast, let's be honest, email me at ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.